Welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission for Tuesday, October 17th. We do have a quorum this evening, missing Travis. Do we have, what am I thinking? Motion to approve minutes for October 3rd.
Mr. Chair,
Billy.
I'll make a motion to approve minutes on October 3rd. What was the meeting date?
October 3rd.
Yeah.
Second. Okay, first by Billy, second by Scott. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. All right. Any opposed? None? All right. So minutes approved. Recognize the person is not on the agenda. I do know that you came and signed up, sir, so come on forward.
Promise won't take too much time.
I just need your name and address for the record.
Brendan McCarthy, 890 East 14th North.
Okay.
Good evening, commissioners. I just wanted to come today and say from the last meeting, I really appreciated the conversation of looking at the city ordinances and establishing if things need to be revised or if they fit, incomplete. I think those are great ideas because sometimes it's not known if it's going to hinder growth for business or if, we're kind of halting, or impeding on residential property rights and that when they come to that. So I think it's great and I hope you guys continue that. Something I looked at and I thought of, and I'm not trying to get ahead of your guys' process here, but 9-12-5, that development services, I think it's something to definitely look at because it's talking about parking lots and that, and it seems like it really narrows down on just using concrete or asphalt. I think it would be something to have a conversation of can we use, porous concrete or asphalt, pavers or anything like that, so that we're giving businesses or residential more options instead of just trying to limit it and essentially turn into a concrete city in that. So anyway, just wanted to come say thank you so much, as I know I'm always a thorn in your side, but thanks for your time.
Well, perspective is good. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Look at that. We have a starting point now. There we go.
Boom.
All right. Anybody else? Okay. Seeing none. Anybody have any conflict of interest for this evening?
None.
None. No public hearing or action this evening. No new business. Now let's move down to old business. We have an action item to approve the finding of facts for Mr. Taryn Mitchell, the TKM Architecture conditional use permit to allow for the construction of an RV park in a C4 zoning district at the corner of Northwest Jerome and Northwest Smith Road.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the finding of fact for PZ 23-64.
Okay, first by Christina. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Billy. Billy, we'll start with you.
Aye.
Christina?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Aye for me as well. Motion passes. Second action item to approve the finding of facts to amended plan of unit development and amend preliminary plat for Mr. Taryn Mitchell, the TKM Architecture. A request to amend a previously approved PUD and plat at Colethorpe Commons located east of Jerome Street and south of Colethorpe Avenue and west of Garrett Street.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve finding of fact PZ 23-74 and PZ 23-75.
Have a second?
Second.
Second by Scott. All right, Scott, we'll start with you.
Aye.
Christina?
Aye.
Billy?
Aye.
Aye for me as well. Motion passes. That's been for the big chunk of why we're here. Moving down to department head items to discuss the review of city ordinances. Through my lengthy reading, it's so invigorating a reading that we have. I did notice in looking at the state's, I'm sorry, my brain stopped working. Looking at the state code, one of the biggest things that I noticed was that we must look at the comprehensive plan, for that must guide every ordinance that we do. So, with that being said, it's up to you all to consider the comprehensive plan to be first reviewed and then move on to the ordinances, or how would you like to do that?
I think that's a good idea, honestly, because that's the guideline. I mean, right?
And it's the,
Or what is it? Chapter 67, titles 65? Or do I have those reversed? That which provides the statutes for all things planning and zoning, citing the comprehensive plan. It says that it can be updated no more often than on a 6-month cadence. I think we're beyond the 6 month of the last time we had talked about
I
making
believe
any
we're at
amendments,
2
so
years, to be honest with you.
we should be well outside of our minimum window.
you want to resolve Robert Rules of Order so we can just talk freely?
That sounds fine with me. Are you good with that? Okay, so we'll resolve Robert's Rules of Order, and everybody is free to speak freely.
So if I'm incorrect, it's supposed to be reviewed every 5 years, a statute. And the last review was December, it was 2020. It was like 2019 when it got approved by the city. So it's coming due in a year and a half. And depending on, and you look at it, how many people go through it and vet it, it's going to be a pretty big undertaking, especially with the stakeholder advisory committee, because we would have to get a new, what's the process for that, do you know?
Exactly. We have to get a stakeholder, we have to do public hearings, we have to, there's a lot of steps that go involved in it. We have to get the funding to be able to get a plan writer. There's a lot of steps that are involved in the process.
Yeah, we got, what, 18 months, give or take, math and public?
Yeah.
Probably that should be, like you said, sure.
Is that usually, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's usually headed by the mayor of the city?
Correct.
Okay. So that'll be an interesting conversation, seeing as how we have a great election coming up, of what may come next. So I know that as the commission, we can sit there and say, this is something that we would like to see, happen, but ultimately it's the mayor that's going to make that decision for us on who he vets and what he's going to do, or she, and move from that process. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. However, we can use what we have and start looking at what we have and start reviewing and revising anything that we feel as though not making grade to what we.
Do we have to put surveys out again, the quantitative surveys?
To amend certain sections of code? No.
To get the, well, I know
In
there's,
order to
plan.
do a new comp plan, yes.
that's, okay, that's what I was
Yeah.
getting at.
Yeah. And
Which-
typically, the comp plan is reviewed in 5 years, but is not completely rewritten every 5 years. Because we have a mechanism in place to amend the comp plan as we see fit. An amendment to the comp plan doesn't require that heavy lift.
Okay.
It only requires a public hearing.
The only problem that I see with that is that when you start looking at the economic development side of the comp plan, everything is changing. When you start bringing in more residents and you start bringing more businesses, all of that is going to change your numbers.
Especially check
Which is
the
why
box.
I think where you're
A
going.
vicious cycle.
Yeah. But seeing as how, we're still another 3 years out, 2 years out,
2 years at least.
I'd say let's start with what we have and determine whether or not the current comp plan meets the needs of not only the citizens, but also the city.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that we need to focus heavily on protecting citizens' rights. I do. I really do. And I think that just because the city wants to move forward in something, the citizens' rights needs to be upheld.
First and foremost.
Yes.
Agreed.
Okay.
So the way my mind's spinning on this is, I agree with what you're saying, but for your heavy lifting with the economic and housing, all these numbers are spurious now because everything has changed so much.
Everything changes monthly.
So, we gotta put a dot on the map to say what day we're gonna use it, but, I don't know how much this is gonna be dependent on everything else.
Right.
And I'm just thinking out loud, literally.
So we definitely, so on that, so looking at the economic development, so if you go to 3, so I know housing is 5, you go to 3, and you start looking at all of the goals, so we have 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, 3.9, 3.10, and start looking at those goals, that is what we're going to determine whether or not we feel as though it is meeting the citizens and the city's needs. So if we look at, for example, 3.6 Goal 1, enhance Mountain Home its current resource and opportunities to attract new industries to allow for a more diverse economic base that has A through G in it. If we took each one of those and looked at it and said, you know what, I think B doesn't quite meet where we're at, we start having that discussion of how can we revise or rewrite or I don't know, throwing another big academic word in there, to kind of get a good understanding, right, of where we need to go.
Amend is the term we.
Yep, that one. I was getting there. Okay, my thesaurus was short. All right.
I think if we're going to take a look at a living document that's as big as the comp plan, not just taking it in bites, but prioritization of what those bites really are. Like what is moving the most, what is the most critical. I think I'd like to get some agreement across the commission, especially when Travis is here and we have legal counsel, to put some priority to the portions of the comp plan that we'd like to look at, as well. When it comes to our original discussion about ordinances, obviously, ordinances there's a lot of papers, or a lot of pages with that. So, in your original intent, do we want to kind of throw darts at the ordinance grouping, or do we want to start taking it in chunks?
I like your idea. I think if we prioritize and we see what's heavy and what we need right now, I think that's a good way to go. First thing that came off the top of my mind was housing.
Oh, yeah.
That was the first thing I thought. So, I mean, and that's 5,
Every
right?
aspect that has to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I say we look at 5, and let's take that as one of our main priorities. So housing is 1.
And for that, it might be a good idea. Do you guys want me to bring the last 3 years of what housing has been doing specifically in Mountain Home?
I think that'd be awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good data point.
I love data. Data's my friend. So do you want the last 3 years, or do you want since the comp plan was written, or do you want the last year and a half since the market started changing?
I think the last 3 years is probably valuable.
Okay.
Agreed. I mean, that'll take you back to 2020 when the comp plan was written.
Okay. So last 3 years, basically. Okay.
If we're making a list of priorities, I would like to also see land use as
Agreed.
a priority.
So on that very topic, not necessarily comp plan related, but the land use chart. Mr. Curtis and I had a brief discussion before the meeting about, obviously, Chris's department is one who handles this chart the most on the day-to-day. He's got some really great feedback in terms of how we can not just condense, but make it a little more concise. There's some conflicting, or I guess you could say dual entry and redundancy in that.
Oh, I agree. That thing is a mess.
Mr. Curtis has a particular set that are highlighted that we've recently encountered in P&Z that's a perfect example of this in terms of propane and fuel
okay.
storage. There's 2 entries. One is permitted. One is outright permitted. One is conditional use.
Oh,
And there's not a clear delineation between the two.
what?
Okay, so land use chart, that is going to be under the land use priorities for sure.
So to dovetail that, we need to kind of think about community design on that, because, you know, you look at this and it says one thing. I mean, like me and you talked before the meeting, growth is happening, it's coming. So land use and, okay, what is the design going to be and how we're going to, especially with zoning, because
That's exactly what I was thinking too. The zoning aspect of it in the
I'll be honest with
future.
you, some of the zoning doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just being,
And then, so that comes into the land use.
yeah.
So land use is that
Some of
zoning.
it.
But then the community
Features.
design of it as well, what is,
Land use chart, the
Yeah.
zoning.
Yeah. The zoning one is really important. I ran into that one a couple of weeks ago. I was having a conversation with somebody about some lots that were within the city, but the use that the future use that they had for it, it was kind of funny. It was like it was commercial, residential, but possibly R4. So then this guy is sitting on it thinking, I could sell it for commercial bucks. Not for long if you keep sitting on it. So.
Right.
I mean, just for sake of clarity, where does that original idea of what should be R4, R3? I mean,
That goes way.
that's what I was thinking about. So when would that really,
So that's in all of these,
yeah, that stuff?
that stuff right there, all of this stuff in
And I
here,
didn't know, Brock, where I was getting at, if there was like a really indents,
definitions. So it's all under definitions, so like, it actually has the definition of what an R4 and all that kind
No,
of
no,
stuff.
I'm talking about just the zoning of it as well.
That aspect actually brings up another good point. As you scroll through any of these title and chapter, it is hit and miss whether there's actually a definition in some of these. There's a lot of interpretation left to a number of uses.
There's 5 different
It's
interpretations.
ambiguous.
Chris pointed this out earlier as well. Definitions are inconsistently applied.
So we're missing completely.
Yeah,
Most of the
awesome.
land use was rewritten in 2015.
I think it's time to look at that. Almost 10
Almost
years.
10 years, yeah.
Because, I mean, you look at the transportation plan and and then land use and how the city's supposed to grow. You know, how, I guess my question is, how was that decided? Was there a public forum on that? Was it,
Absolutely. You talking about the original, the last transportation
yeah,
plan? Was that-
well, not the transportation plan, but that including with the land use? Because, okay, we post, like, Fifth West was all farm, but now it's turning residential.
9-7-5.
I guess,
Yeah.
how did they come up with the grand screen?
Because I think that's
You know,
the
'cause-
one
Public input,
He
public
brought it.
forum, like committee just
Yep.
like this.
Okay, now I'm just.
Yeah.
Your computer just went out.
the big
It's-
screen keeps
we have
going
a-
on the fritz.
We have something wrong with the HDMI cable, and we're trying to figure out where it is. We don't know if it's a power issue or if it's
Squirrel.
just the.
So a committee made up the future land use.
Absolutely.
So it was just like a stakeholder group that was, okay.
So the other factor of the comp plan that I would like to address, and recognizing in discussion with Mr. Curtis prior to the meeting that it's potentially a big bite. I think we could address some of this by ordinance cleanup. I think the implications on the surface level of what some of these references are. I have printed out, I found a fairly clean example of land for recreation areas and facilities and how they're conveyed to a city. City of McKinney, Texas had some really interesting verbiage and a pretty robust approach to how they assign guidelines, requirements, exceptions to the conveyance of land for recreational area. If a developer wants to bring, a pocket park, and what guidelines each of those, styles of use for open space and what that means for the city in terms of conveyance, may, in this example, might equate to a 15% of the tax rate for that parcel be due to the city for ongoing maintenance. There's some interesting verbiage in here. We printed out a handful of copies, and I'm going to pass those down. I did highlight a couple things. Again, understanding that this is a giant bite if looking at doing it in terms of like a parks master plan like they reference here. Some of this is kind of not necessarily applicable to us in this town, but page 6 has a highlight under section 2 guidelines. The highlight there, maintaining many small parks is inefficient and too costly for the city to sustain over the long term, I think was my key takeaway from this reference. I've heard from many people over the past couple of months that their pocket parks are not being maintained properly, or they don't know who owns a portion of land somewhere. If you have the ability, Chris, can you pull up that area that we talked about?
Absolutely.
Over on East 4th North on the west side of town, there is an interesting segment of land that falls within a housing development. That strip there in the center is essentially like a gravel pass-through. I believe the original intent was for stormwater drainage, that kind of thing. The HOA in that area, as far as I've been told, is either gone dormant or has been dissolved. Residents in that area have bumped into issues where people are parking their RVs there, like a neighboring property is parking their RV there, and another neighbor has conflict saying that this is a nuisance, or why is your RV there, not my RV there? I need to park my boat there. And then comes the issue of who's maintaining this. If the HOA dissolves, this portion of property has not been conveyed to the city, and I'll make a personal note that I would be opposed to such a thing being conveyed to the city for upkeep. But if the HOA is in a non-existent state or a dormant state, who's in charge of maintaining this? If code enforcement drives by and goes, okay, well, neighbor number one on Tyndall Street there might have their boat parked in that spot, and there's weeds parked around it, whose responsibility are the weeds? Who does code enforcement go to? If the HOA isn't in existence, then code enforcement's hands are pretty much tied in the sense that there's nothing to be done other than being good neighbors and hopefully.
I can tell you what they do now,
Mhm.
is that everybody that lives within that subdivision receives a notice,
Which is
because that's the only thing, that's the only measure they can take.
right, and I'm certainly not opposed to that. What I would like to see is to make sure that the city is not going to be conveyed a property like this, that these are in the plats, that these are their own recorded parcels and attributed to the HOA perhaps. I would just like to see, we picked out a handful of instances like this, just zooming in on, on the streets view through GIS. And like
There's one
this
down
one
in the
here.
old subdivision and on a ridge.
Oh, there's
Right.
that one
And so
there
there's
too.
this one that's, baseball diamond shaped.
Yeah, that's
and
my one I was talking about right there.
it's been in existence for 20 years now, and it's still up in the air on whose responsibility it is,
What
right?
about the Silverstone pool? Well, it turns into a pool certain times of the
Right.
year.
And so that
Over here?
in particular brings up a really good point, and that in this example
So
from
hazardous.
McKinney, Texas, they talk about, like they go into detail about how these types of uses, pocket parks within developments, they outline the requirements that if a developer brings in park equipment like play toys for kids, that they must meet a certain standard similar to that of what the city would require. That it can't just be something you plop down from Costco, essentially, is like my takeaway from that. That they are, being met with a certain safety standard, that the construction, is up to par, and that the parcels that those exist in, we have the practice now where some of these pocket parks that do get conveyed to the city are dual purpose in that they're a playground and a drainage area, the stormwater retention. It's an optimal use on the surface level. It becomes, I think, a burden when it comes to was the construction and design and engineering of the stormwater drainage appropriate and up to what a city would require of themselves doing the same thing. So there's not to say that this needs to be instated in this manner in its entirety, but I think there's a lot of valuable info to glean from this that we could either attack from an ordinance perspective, or I think it would be a large and costly bite to instate like a parks master plan like they reference here. So I don't know that that's in the best interest in the moment. Perhaps that's something the city could look at down the road, but we don't have a parks master plan as far as I could find today. So maybe that is something that,
That's something that I think we should look at for sure. And I don't think I know as a planning and zoning commission, we can push for that. Even have those conversations to start creating a master plan, because ultimately it's going to fall underneath those ordinances anyway.
right.
So,
So that might provide the framework, essentially functioning as the charter to instate and ensure in the future what these kind of uses are applied, how they're conveyed, maintenance costs, those kind of things. I think this is, like I said, it doesn't have to be reviewed tonight, but Chris helped me packets for everybody to take a look at, so.
So
And if you need the link, I can send electronic.
who maintains them now, like in Silverstone? Is it maintained by the homeowner association?
No, so we don't have an HOA, but I think Parks and Rec is the one that sends out something to go. They send out people to go mow. But here's the other thing. So we have playground equipment, and I'm glad that you brought this up. We have playground equipment on the pool side. Sorry, being facetious. But on the other side of Silverstone, there's another one. And so that one just got some equipment as well. I don't know who that came from, if that was the city or if that was a private organization, but I have a neighbor that would really like to see a park in Silverstone that is more toddler and small child friendly. Because right now, both of the ones that are in are not small child friendly.
What do you think about the master park plan? Really, we got Legacy, and there's no really open spaces on that.
That end of town is a desert for a lot of things, right? Large open park space. It's really a food desert over there when it comes to like retail shopping for groceries, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of factors on that side of town, you know, bike and walking paths, you know, are very fragmented. Even so much as, you know, curb gutter sidewalk are fragmented on that side of town. So I think that kind of falls more under the master transportation plan part. But,
And
you
also, I
know,
don't think it's
perhaps we could start, maybe a parks master plan is a good light the fire to figure out how to overcome some of that in the future.
I think that's a great idea.
So after hearing what you stated, I'm all in favor of it. Let's create a priority list of what we feel as though we need to tackle first. And I know that, I don't know if the park master plan needs to be on that, but it can at least be in a subheading of some kind for our priorities.
I think, you know, in reference to like a parks master plan or that type of like, you know, the general ordinances under that, community design, I think is the larger heading priority.
So do you want to say, because we started the conversation with land use, do we want to make that the priority and then move on to, I'm sorry, what you just said?
I think the land use ought to be in my opinion, the land use ought to be priority number one. I mean, that's our primary function. That's the thing that Chris and building services deal with the most. The land use chart seems to be like the first easy bite, like operations, we can clean up what we already have. It's not that heavy of a lift, gets the ball rolling, and then subtopics under land use behind that, you know, could be
I know definitions is something we talked about,
definitions, yeah.
or lack thereof. Okay, so we'll make priority number one land use. We'll start with the land use chart. And because I know how government meetings go, I would like to make sure that we also have a due date for when we would like to have this completed. Otherwise, it will not be done.
So if we're averaging 2 meetings per month, right? And we don't take any off in November or December, would you think that, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4,
So we have 1, 2, 3 left in the calendar year. The last P and Z of the month of December is there's no scheduled meeting that time. We never have that second meeting.
so then we have 3 coming up
3 left.
in the year. Plus another 9 more in the new year. Because I'm thinking 12. I'm thinking that's the lucky number right there.
Well, and if I may, there's nothing that says that we can't do a public notice and do a meeting, like a work group session during the day. If that's something that is appealing to you, where we could sit down for a 2-hour meeting and hash it out between, say, 3 and 5, or on any given day. That's definitely an option. I know we all work, so.
Right, we all work,
It is an
but
option that is available.
Yeah.
as well, building services is in-house during those times. Like Chris and I mentioned, to each other earlier, Brenda Ellis is like a wealth of knowledge when it comes to all things
Yep.
city. Hank would be a great one to put in, that there might be at least scheduling overlap somewhere that we might be able to achieve something like that. It'd be hard, obviously, being a school teacher, you're.
I'm done at 3:30. You kidding? Fine.
Just an option to throw out.
So would we make it a public hearing to where the public can come in and,
Absolutely.
I like that idea. I like that idea. It shouldn't,
Anytime the commission meets, the public has to be.
okay.
And
Yeah, it shouldn't be a bunch of,
So do you feel that we need
People
12
meeting
meetings for
without-
the land use chart?
what was that?
Do you think we feel like you need 12 meetings just for the land use?
Oh, goodness, no, I was
Okay.
thinking for the whole thing.
Oh, I was only going with priority one. I was like, 12 meetings seems a bit much, but I mean,
I think we tackle this and we get her done by January. If I'm being honest, I think if we give ourselves a couple of hours each time, I think that should be sufficient. What do you think?
100% land use chart we could get done before the first of the year.
Yeah.
Definitions is going to be a
How will
little.
this dovetail into that?
Definitions needs
Because
to-
we talk about the land use chart, and that right there is gonna have a big denominator of it.
well, this dovetails into land use chart. By in order for this to actually have any meaning, you need to have an idea of the land use.
Yeah.
So
That's our
to
foundation.
square that way, yeah, I think
So
land use
do we
is
have to
the
bring in
foundation.
the public at all for like any kind of public hearing, or,
Not necessarily.
For updating the land use chart, we wouldn't have to.
but when we want the public input?
Absolutely.
The only time-
You do not have to take public input to update a land use chart.
It just seemed like the right thing though to do though.
I'm not saying it's not, I'm just telling you, and it's an amendment to the city code.
The only time that you would have to
Public
take
input
public
always
input
best.
would probably be if you were changing something from permissible to
Restricted?
Yeah.
restricted or
Conditional to
conditional.
outright permitted.
yeah. When you're moving that kind of thing, then I believe you need to have public input.
Like the propane one is like a perfect
It is
example
always
of that.
best to get the public's input.
Oh, I agree. I think legally though, you need to have public input when it comes to moving, like any kind like that. But if we're like switching things within the land use chart based off of definitions and anything like that, then
For
yes,
clarification.
of course, yes. Yeah, to amend anything, amend.
Amend.
I'm using words now.
I like it.
So with that being said, I would really like to see, in regards to the housing stuff, I know we'll get to it then and I'll make a note, but I would really like to see, there's a lot of houses in Mountain Home from back in the day that still have that 0 lot line garage or shop, that sort of thing. And we have to, they can't rebuild it. If it burns down or whatever, they can't rebuild it the way it is.
Because it has to fit within the code of what's
Because
now.
What's now, yeah.
Right.
So the setbacks and everything, that would be,
We already have that in code,
we do,
absolutely.
okay.
Yep, anything over 50% has to be built to new standards if it's a non-conforming structure or
Yeah.
non-conforming use.
But if it burns down, they can't put it back up the way it was.
Correct.
They have to comply with the current code.
Okay.
I'm just telling you what our code says.
I know.
So
I
then,
mean, I
okay, so how about this? So
might throw in
By
the ADU
December-
conversation too.
end of December, I'm putting end of December. To have land use and anything within the land use discussed and finalized,
I like it.
okay? Priority number 2,
Is the parks master plan?
do you want to do that or you want to do housing?
I think housing.
Okay? And I'm not going to put any kind of time on that. We'll hit that once we get done with the.
Well, that'll
land use.
actually give us a perfect, not perfect, but it'll give us the perfect amount of time because then we would be able to complete out 2023 in regards to data points
Mhm.
for housing.
Agreed. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so we'll do land use first by the end of December, then we'll hit housing for priority 2, and because I like to work in threes,
Economic development.
hmm?
You were talking about economic development. I think what chapter was that?
Well, I would say what you were pushing for was community design.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so the community design, I think the parks
Then that
falls
could
under
fall
that,
yeah.
economic
So then
development.
we'll say
could.
number 3 is community design.
I think all of them is gonna, the housing is gonna, everything's kind of gonna be synergized together.
Okay, so that's currently our top 3, and we'll start crushing these out.
Community design.
And I think parks will fall underneath that one.
I think so too.
And we should have,
I also believe, sorry Scott, I do believe that what Brendan was talking about earlier was 912.5 would fall into that too, because
Agreed.
technically that would be falling under the community design portion of
Agreed.
things.
I hope you will join us.
we'll be here.
Okay, I think we have a good start on this. And that means that next meeting, we will plan for time to discuss land use, come with anything that you see. Does everybody have a land use chart?
A given, I have to have
I
that.
can email a land use chart to everybody, that's super easy.
Okay.
Yeah.
That way we at least all have something that's similar that
I
we're
know-
looking for.
I
I'm
know
pretty
where
sure
to
the one
find
I'm
it.
looking at is,
I can email and I can actually add it to the packet that I deliver.
okay,
If that works for
Sweet.
you.
perfect.
Yeah.
And I would like to coordinate like our final decisions on a night that we can make sure Mr. Schroeder or his counterpart.
Oh,
will
he has
here.
to be here for sure.
Like,
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. And also on that, if we are planning on doing any major adjustments, again, talking about, what's permissible and what's conditional and stuff like that, we need public
Public
input
input.
and we need to have it as an action item,
Agreed.
so. Okay, anything else?
That's it for me for the moment.
Same.
Billy?
Just thinking, no, that's. No, I'm good.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. In that case, I'll adjourn at 6:07.
Thank you for doing that.
So, I will tell you right now, one of the things I absolutely love.
You're still being recorded on.
That's fine. Letter I is exactly what you were talking about. I loved it.